Here we have the Cold Steel Finn-Wolf fixed blade. This is model number 20PW. You can see that listed on the end of the box. The Finn-Wolf was introduced in 2008, and it was made through 2009, but it was discontinued in 2010. Yeah, this is just like a nice medium to small, I would say, fixed blade. This knife you can see marked on the flat of the blade. Get some focus here. This camera will cooperate. Okay, there we go. We see that it is made in Taiwan as marked. And on the other side, you see the Finn-Wolf. There were several other knives at the time of the manufacture of this knife in Cold Steel's lineup that were made with similar materials and had shared construction characteristics, I'd say, including the Fin Bear, which was a contemporary offering at the same time this knife was available. This Finn-Wolf is patterned after the Puukko knives of Finland, which are the traditional Finnish style general purpose knives. In comparison, the Finn-Wolf has kind of a thicker, stiffer spine, which is, supporting its hollow grind profile. We have a, saber grind, but the bevel here is a hollow grind. And you can see also that it has a slightly bowed clip on the point. So this knife was made as a encapsulated partial tang. The tang runs, maybe halfway into the handle, as you see. And this handle is polypropylene. This is an overmolded handle, injection molding, which there's a little remainder there of where it was presumably injected. So it goes into the mold, and the polypropylene is thermoplastic polymer, generally just called plastic. Very durable material, resistant to chemicals, pretty much impervious to the elements, good for the outdoors. This handle is meant to withstand, being outside and not swelling or anything like that, so this is unlikely to rot, or, if it's in the sun, it's not going to melt. You wouldn't want to leave it on a hot engine or something like that, but it's probably not going to crack very easily, and with temperature fluctuations, it's not going to warp or anything like that. So it's quite a stable material, and it's a little bit tacky. It's not my favorite material necessarily for a handle, but it's certainly does the job. It's pretty good. It's comfortable. aside from the fact, given its size, it is a little bit of a smaller handle. I have, I guess you'd say medium-sized hands. What are my hands measurements here? It's about, my hand's about that big. So for me, this is a little bit on the small side, but it's not uncomfortable by any means. Yeah, again, it has this concave clip with the saber grind, hollow grind. No choil. That's alright. The finish is nice. It's got a satin finish. Really kind of a handsome finish to the knife. This is made of 4116 Krupp stainless, which is a medium carbon steel, about 0.45% to 0.55% carbon, and it's considered to be highly resistant to corrosion, given that it has about 14% to 15% chromium. There's also a little bit of molybdenum and vanadium in the steel, less than 1%, but this is a pretty highly stainless steel, and given those, given its composition, this steel is used somewhat frequently, I guess you could say, in hygienic applications, surgical tools, of course, entry-level factory knives like the Finwolf would be another application, and it's quite popular as well with kitchen cutlery. Given that this this steel originates in Germany, this steel was quite popular, at least at the time this knife was made, in cutlery brands like Henkel's and Wusthof. It has, good properties. Of course, can handle it being in the kitchen and getting wet in the sink and all that, but it's easy to sharpen also, and it's reasonably tough. So a pretty good overall steel at a kind of a lower price point. This steel is pretty popular also in some Spanish knives. The Spaniards have a proprietary equivalent. They would call that molybdenum vanadium steel, MOVA, M-O-V-A. And you see this steel, in brands like Muela and Nieto and Joker. In the Finwolf, this steel has been hardened to 56 HRC to 57 HRC, which is not as high as the steel can be made, but it's pretty high up there. Now, one drawback of this 4116 that I found is, and maybe I can show you along the edge, if this will, okay, there is, maybe that's a good look right there. There is a tendency of the blade to chip out a little bit. And that could be due also, if not the hardness, but also potentially to potentially to the sharpening angle, the grind. This is probably, and I've resharpened this, this is probably at about 20 degrees. I don't remember exactly, my last resharpening, what I did with it, but I would say it's about 20 degrees. So, I mean, it's not hard to sharpen or anything like that, but, I did notice that about the edge. Dimensionally, this knife is listed at 3.6 ounces, and it has an overall length, as I measure here, of 9 inches, which is slightly less than the listed specifications, but of course, there's some room for discrepancies between what manufacturers list and what is. Blade length is about 4 3/4. Handle length about 4 1/4. So it comes out about 9 overall. Blade thickness. Let's see if we can show that. Okay. Yeah, so that's about 1/10 of an inch. About 2.5 millimeters or 2 3/4 millimeters. And the blade height, looking at, say the thickest part of this, it's all fairly the same, but so height is looking at a little less than 3/4, so call it 0.7-ish. And I'll mark this in the video for you guys. This is, about 0.7 inches. Yeah, so this knife is, given its design, that Puko inspired design, this knife is, good for small game, field dressing. I mean, I guess you could skin something larger, but I mean, if you were to be cutting through bones and whatnot, probably smaller game. So, field dressing, cleaning fish, carving your sticks, cutting rope, other chores you might have around camp. And I've used this on some trips, and it's fine. It's up to the job. I was happy with it. This is not a dedicated bushcraft knife per se, but it, given it's a hollow grind versus a Scandinavian grind. But, it's not a bushcraft knife, but it could, swing into that role if you, needed to do some carving. It's not going to be your top choice, but it's not going to be terrible. This is really, an affordable utility knife. Fixed blade. Cold Steel marketed this knife as something of a survival knife, but realistically, this isn't, a doomsday beat through logs kind of knife. Under hard use, there's a fair chance that it would fail if you pushed it too far, like aggressive batoning through wood. And that's partly due to its blade length. You're not going to span large logs with that, but also given its construction limitations with that partial tang and the overmolded polypropylene. I mean, that could be a point of failure. But, that's not to say this knife can't fulfill its role in practical purposes. It's certainly up to practical tasks. Now, this knife came with a pouch style Cordura nylon sheath. Has a belt loop. This is inexpensive sheath. At least the time it was made, it was not a high dollar knife and sheath combination. But this is an affordable and functional knife. It's a nice sheath. Overall, I'd say it holds the knife securely. I cannot break it loose, and I'm shaking just as hard as you might be if you were running or something like that. It's holding it in there. Now, I found that this sheath, one of its downsides is it creates a tight fit between the handle and the sheath, and it's actually seems to be a tight seal that actually traps moisture. So if you were to leave this sheath, the knife in the sheath long term, especially if it's wet or if you're in a humid environment, you will notice some rust, and I've experienced that myself. There was some kind of, you might call it like sugar rust, surface rust, but it's not, even though it's stainless steel, you might experience some of that. Because it really locks in that moisture. And there's no drain hole with the sheath. It's a good sheath, especially given its cost. This is not a high dollar item, like I say, but not meant to be storing the knife, long term. So that's the Cold Steel Finwolf, model number 20PW. Thanks for watching.